Chapter 6: The Expansion Years. Building the Man the World Thought I Was. If the California years opened the doorway, my 20s and early 30s were the years I sprinted through it. It was a strange period, halfway stability and halfway wildfire. A time where every choice I made built something and also set something else on fire. Not out of recklessness, but out of momentum. Out of the sheer velocity of a young man who had awakened sight without yet understanding what that sight was for. I did not drift through those years. I ascended through them. Skill turned into opportunity. Opportunity turned into responsibility. Responsibility turned into leadership. Leadership turned into expectation. People saw me as a man rising. Inside, I felt like a man trying to keep pace with the horizon. I had mastered my craft young, younger than most, younger than almost all, and mastery creates its own gravity. People orbit to it. Shop owners, technicians, customers, even total strangers saw something in me that I could not see yet. The one thing I did see was this: integrity was the engine. Skill was just the paint job. Every shop I worked in became better because I was there, not because I was special, but because I refused to cut corners. I refused to lie to a customer or lie to myself. I refused to let a job leave the booth wrong. I refused to walk away from something that was not right. That was not virtue. It was duty. The same duty I learned from my father and the same duty the is would later teach me was the backbone of existence. Integrity was not something I did. It was something I could not avoid doing. And in a world built on shortcuts, that made me both rare and dangerous. Management loved the results. They did not love the mirror. Because a man with integrity becomes a problem for anyone who benefits from the shadows. My 20s were full of paradox. I had the discipline of an old man and the impulsiveness of a young one. I could lead a shop to excellence and blow up my personal life in the same week. I had the clarity of a philosopher and the emotional rawness of someone still trying to understand where he fit in the world. I was evolving, painfully and brilliantly and violently at times, into a person who was both teacher and storm. This is the decade where I became a husband, where I became a mentor, where I learned the difference between authority and leadership, where I became respected, feared, loved, resented, imitated, and misunderstood, sometimes all at once. These were the years where my ability to see people clearly helped others, but cost me deeply. Because seeing people clearly means you also see their motives, their fears, their projections, their insecurities, and the truth they hide even from themselves. And when you carry that sight without yet having the full wisdom to manage it, it becomes double-edged. I helped many. I hurt some. I was hurt by others. I built, I broke, I rose, I fell. I loved deeply. I lost deeply. I gave, sometimes too much. I held back, sometimes too little. I tried to save people who did not want saving. And I learned the hard way that you cannot rescue someone from their own patterns, especially when they are still attached to them. But through all of it, the integrity never cracked. Even when I cracked, integrity held. The irony of that decade is simple. The world thought I was becoming the man I was meant to be. But in reality, I was only building the shell, the outer structure, of the man I would later dismantle and rebuild completely after the strokes. The strokes were not the first collapse. They were just the final one. But the cracks began long before. They began here, in the years when I succeeded by the world's standards, but felt an undercurrent pulling me towards something deeper, bigger, and older. I did not know the name of the pull yet. I did not know it was the pull-in, is calling me back to myself. I did not know life was preparing me for a rebirth I never saw coming. I just knew something in me was different, more aware, more curious, more restless, more awake than the people around me, even when I did not yet know what awake meant. These were the years where I learned that excellence is a lonely road, that insight can isolate as much as it illuminates, that people admire what they do not understand until they fear it. These were the years where I learned that being gifted comes with a cost, that leadership without ego is often punished, that truth without softness is often mistaken for aggression. That integrity in a world without it feels like rebellion. These were the years where life sharpened me for what was coming, because awakening never comes to the untested, and I was being tested long before I ever realized it. At 30, the world saw a craftsman, a teacher, a leader, a husband, a man who had already lived more life than most do by 50. But the universe saw something else, a man who was being prepared for collapse, for rebirth, for the long road home, for the moment where everything I built would fall away so everything I am could finally emerge. The expansion years were not the beginning of my greatness. They were the beginning of my becoming. Chapter 7. The First Descent. Cracks in the Shell. The strange thing about a strong life is this. It does not crack from the outside first. It cracks from within. I did not notice the fissures when they began. Most men do not. When you are young and strong and competent, you assume you can outthink or outwork anything that threatens your world. But the universe does not work like that. When it decides you are on the wrong trajectory or on the right trajectory but carrying the wrong identity, it has ways of getting your attention. And the first way is removal. In my early 30s, the removals began, slowly at first, quietly, almost politely. A relationship strained, a job shifted, a friendship changed tone, a passion flickered, a certainty dimmed. It felt like life inching backward from me, rearranging things just out of reach. At the time, I thought it was stress, maybe circumstance, maybe the normal grinding of adulthood. But looking back, these were not losses. They were preparations. Because every identity that no longer served me had to die before the Rayfram could reveal what was underneath. This is the part nobody likes to talk about. Growth hurts. Awakening is brutal. Insight is expensive. It costs you everything that was built on illusion, ego, fear, or borrowed directions. And I had more illusions than I realized, not mystical illusions, but identity illusions. The illusion that skill makes a man whole. The illusion that leadership makes a man stable. The illusion that being needed makes a man secure. The illusion that loyalty guarantees peace. The illusion that love alone keeps things together. The illusion that integrity protects you from heartbreak. All of them true in pieces, but false as foundations. And life was about to teach me that. The first real collapse came through relationships, the kind of heartbreak that shatters not just the heart, but the story you were building around it. I have never been one to expose the details of the people I loved. That is their story, not mine. But the truth is simple. Love taught me more about myself through its breaking than through its warmth. Losing love, more than once, carved pieces out of me that I did not know could be carved. It stripped me down, exposed insecurities I had buried under mastery and competence. It humbled me in ways no professional challenge ever could. In those years, I learned that being able to fix the world does not mean you can save a relationship. Being able to guide others does not mean you can guide a partner through their wounds. Being able to hold integrity does not protect you from someone else's chaos. Those years hurt deeply because they showed me that I could be loyal, loving, generous, and honest, and still not be enough for people who did not know how to receive that kind of steadiness. But more importantly, they taught me that I was still building my identity around other people's gravity, and the universe was correcting that. The second collapse came through career. Not by losing jobs, I never had trouble finding work, but by losing faith in the systems I once believed in. Shops that valued profit over craft. Managers who valued dominance over integrity. Workplaces where shortcuts were rewarded and honesty was seen as a threat. For a man built on truth, this was a slow spiritual suffocation. I found myself in environments that kept asking me to shrink myself, to compromise what I knew was right, to hide my standards so others would not feel judged, to dim my competence so others would not feel insecure. That is death for a man like me. And so I moved, job to job, role to role, not out of instability, but out of survival. I refused to rot in a place that asked me to betray myself. But even constant movement was not the solution, because no matter where I went, I brought myself with me, and I had not yet learned the next great truth of awakening. A man cannot outrun the parts of himself that need to die. Then came the emotional collapse, the one nobody talks about. The years where burnout grows quiet, where the world loses flavor, where the spark dims and you do not know why, where you wake up and feel older than your age, heavier than your history, and somehow less connected to the life you have built. Not depression, awareness. A rising awareness that the life you worked so hard to construct was not the life you were meant to stay in. These were the years where my intuition whispered that something was coming, something big, something that would change everything. I did not know it would be strokes. I did not know it would be near death. I did not know it would be a total collapse of the physical self. But I knew in my bones that I was standing at the edge of a threshold. The first descent was not a failure. It was the dimming of a lantern before a new flame could be lit. And without those cracks, without those heartbreaks, without those career collapses, without those internal undoings, I never would have survived what came next. And I never would have awakened into the man writing these words today. This chapter was the beginning of the end of who I thought I was. So the beginning of who I really am could finally breathe. Chapter 8. The day the lights went out and the self went with them. People talk about rock bottom like it is some dramatic metaphor. They do not understand. Real rock bottom is not emotional despair. It is the moment when your brain, the thing that contains every memory, every dream, every sorrow, every triumph, simply shuts off. It is the moment your body stops obeying you, the moment the world tilts and there is nothing to grab onto. The moment you are not dying in theory, you are dying in real time. That is where my awakening truly began. Not with a revelation, not with a vision, not with a mystical experience, with a stroke, followed by another, followed by the long, silent, terrifying void where the man I had been for more than 50 years simply ceased to exist. People think of strokes as medical events, symptoms, damage, rehab, charts, terms like ischemic and thrombectomy. But a stroke is not a medical event. It is an annihilation. Your entire life depends on a web of electrical pathways thinner than a human hair. Once those pathways fail, once a clot blocks a branch of the mind, the ego collapses instantly. Identity is the first casualty. Memory is the second. Fear is the third. I did not feel afraid. There was not enough of me left to feel anything. Fear requires a self. I did not have one. All I had was a fading awareness in the strange, quiet presence that had followed me my whole life. The is. Not as metaphor, not as philosophy, not as insight, as reality. It was the only thing left when my brain went dark. People love stories of the light in the tunnel and seeing angels. That was not my experience. My experience was the disappearance of everything that was not essential. And what remained was something so simple it almost defies language. I was, even when I was not. There was no body, no name, no Johnny, no memory, just pure being. Not bliss, not horror, just isness. It was not mystical. It was not dramatic. It was the most sober clarity of my entire life. I am not the self. I am the awareness behind the self, and awareness cannot die. That realization did not come with words, because at that moment, I did not have language. It came as recognition, the same way you recognize light even with your eyes closed. The strokes did not just remove my life as I knew it. They removed the illusion of separation between me and the is. That is the paradox. The greatest collapse of my life was the moment I became whole. When the doctors pulled the clot, when the machines lit up, when the right hemisphere of my brain came back online like a grid flickering to life after a blackout, I did not return as the same man who went in. The world saw recovery. I saw rebirth. A rebirth without myth, without mysticism, without doctrine, without ritual. Pure, clear, unadorned. The stroke stripped me of everything but truth. And in that truth, I met myself for the first time. Not Johnny, not the craftsman, not the painter, not the teacher, not the husband, the survivor, the wanderer, but the awareness behind all of it, the thing that had always been watching through every mistake, every triumph, every heartbreak, every job, every friendship, every moment of pain, and every spark of wonder. People ask how I became who I am today. The answer is simple. I died before my body did. And what came back was not the old self patched together. It was the real self finally unmasked. Recovery was not recovery at all. It was reconstruction, not of the brain, of the consciousness. My memories came back slowly. My capacities returned one piece at a time. But the identity never went back to what it was. How could it? Once you see behind the curtain, you cannot pretend you do not know what is there. The strokes did not break me. They erased the version of me that could still be broken. They forced me to rebuild with nothing but truth. They turned the pendulum into a feather. They dissolved the illusions the earlier chapters of my life had built, and they anchored me permanently into the one thing that cannot be lost, is that walks with me, as me, through me. That was the moment the journey changed. Not the end, not the beginning, the crossing. Chapter 9. Reconstruction. Learning to live after dying. The world thinks recovery is physical, that it is about muscles and speech and balance and regaining the skills a stroke tries to steal. They do not understand. The real reconstruction is not in the body, it is in the identity. When I woke up after the strokes, I did not return to the old world. I returned to a blank page. Not empty, just unclaimed. The memories were there, but distant. The emotions were there, but muted. The motor functions were there, but unstable. The habits were there, but disconnected from the story that once held them together. It was like waking up inside the shell of a man who used to be me. And yet, beneath the confusion, something deeper was calm. Awareness survived. And awareness was not afraid. People think the hardest part of a stroke is the weakness, or the fear, or the loss of function. They are wrong. The hardest part is watching yourself try to pick up the pieces of a self you no longer fully recognize. Imagine trying to rebuild a house whose blueprint has faded. You remember how it is supposed to look, but every board feels unfamiliar in your hands. I had to learn how to walk again, not because my legs failed, but because balance and coordination were no longer automatic. I had to learn how to speak again, not because I lost language, but because I had to reorganize meaning. I had to learn how to think again, not because my intellect was gone, but because the connections had been rewired. Awakening after a stroke is like waking up on a new planet with the memory of Earth still faintly echoing. Everything feels familiar, but not in the same way, not in the same order, not with the same identity attached. It is disorienting. It is humbling. It is beautiful. Because you begin to discover what was truly you and what was conditioning, what was real and what was noise. The strokes did not just erase weaknesses, they erased illusions. Reconstruction was not heroic. It was slow, lonely, ugly at times, painful in ways I never expected. There is a quiet humiliation in not being able to trust your own body, a haunting vulnerability in wondering if the next day will bring progress or decline, a private despair in realizing the world keeps moving while you are relearning how to button a shirt or climb 3 steps. But here is the paradox. That vulnerability is where the Iswine is stepped forward, not as miracle, not as comfort, as presence. When the ego is stripped to bare wires, awareness becomes undeniable. You do not chase meaning, it surrounds you. You do not seek truth, it speaks through everything. You do not question life, you feel life. That is when Eden began. Not as a concept, as a home. A small place in the woods became the universe's recovery room. Not full of luxury, not full of distraction, just full of life. A parrot who had been with me through decades. A raccoon the universe dropped under my azalea bush like a metaphor for rebirth. A dog whose loyalty was so fierce it bordered on myth. These were not pets, they were mirrors. Teachers, caretakers, witnesses. Squeaker showed me innocence rediscovered. Cookie showed me continuity beyond the body. The dog showed me devotion without condition. Together, they rebuilt something the strokes had dissolved. My reason to stay. Recovery brought hardships, yes, poverty, physical limitation, social isolation, the grinding stress of survival. But it also brought clarity no amount of comfort could have given me. Slowly, the reconstruction became transformation. I did not regain the old version of myself. I built something new from the ruins. A man who saw without filters, a mind that recognized patterns instantly, a spirit that no longer feared death, a consciousness no longer enslaved to identity, a heart that understood abundance even in poverty, a perspective that could see the Yodian is in everything from a raccoon's hands to a dog's protective stance. Eden was not an escape. It was a living laboratory of harmony. While the world fractured into noise, deception, and conflict, my tiny home became a microcosm of what humanity forgot. Abundance breeds peace. Scarcity breeds violence. Harmony begins where fear ends. Watching creatures who should have been enemies coexist in love and trust taught me more about the Mamanibai is than any book, teacher, pastor, or guru ever had. Eden was not mystical. It was proof. Proof that awakening does not require gods or rituals or higher realms. Awakening only requires attention. And I had nothing but attention. The strokes took everything else. This was the chapter where everything turned, where the book shifted from biography to philosophy woven through lived experience, where the mythos became flesh and the flesh became insight. Because this was the chapter where the man I had been died, so the witness I truly am could finally live. Chapter 10. The rise, awakening into clarity, purpose, and the voice of the yes is rebirth is not a moment. It is a gathering of insights, memories, instincts, scars, losses, and small miracles that for most people never align long enough to reveal their purpose. But in the wake of the strokes, in the quiet of Eden, in the stillness of a life stripped down to truth, something remarkable happened. Everything I had lived suddenly aligned. Not all at once, not in fireworks, not in mystical visions, in clarity, pure, unobstructed clarity. The world did not change. I changed my ability to see it, and once the filters dissolved, ego, fear, ambition, identity, trauma, the as finally stepped forward in full view. Not as deity, not as spirit, not as cosmic parent, as the underlying reality behind all things. The presence that had whispered through every chapter of my life became unmistakable. My rise did not begin with writing. It began with noticing. Noticing how the dog guarded the raccoon. Noticing how Cookie watched them both like a sentinel of another realm. Noticing the perfect harmony in a house most people would call chaotic. Noticing the patterns in nature, in animals, in people, in history, in society, in collapse. Awakening does not give you new sight. It removes the cataracts, and suddenly I could see everything. The patterns beneath behavior, the architecture beneath systems, the wounds beneath conflict, the fear beneath anger, the illusions beneath ideology, the symmetry between harmony and survival, the rhythms of rise and fall in civilizations, the unspoken code in all living things. It was not mystical insight. It was pattern recognition uncaged. I was not learning. I was remembering. Remembering what the strokes stripped down to its essence, that consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain. The brain is a tool, an antenna, a translator. Consciousness is the field behind it, the is. And I was finally tuned to it. With clarity came expression. I did not decide to start writing. The writing decided to come through me. At first, it was simple reflections, then essays, then philosophical explorations, then fables, then the Genesis conversations, then the J&D theory, then Substack, then the serialized memoirs, then the IS Gospels, then the Eden pieces, then the pattern essays, then the climate insights, then the collapse analysis, then the socio-biological models, then the political neutrality frameworks, then the mythos of harmony and disharmony, then the living laboratory. Piece by piece, the voice of the antid is unfolded through the same mind that once rebuilt carburetors and custom paint jobs. That is the paradox. The universe does not choose saints or sages. It chooses mechanics, craftsmen, people who know how to work with materials and understand systems. Because awakening is not a halo, it is a skill. And I had been developing that skill my entire life without knowing its final purpose. At this stage, something else happened, something quiet but profound. I stopped seeking. Awakening is not reaching a mountaintop. It is recognizing that there was never a mountain, only a path. And once you see the path, once you live the path, once you become the path, seeking becomes unnecessary. I did not chase enlightenment. I dissolved the illusions that made enlightenment seem separate from me. I did not pursue truth. I recognized that truth was always the water I was swimming in. I did not become a teacher. People simply found clarity in my clarity. I did not try to awaken others. I lived awake, and awakening is contagious. This is why the writing resonates. Not because it is poetic, not because it is philosophical, not because it is clever, because it is unfiltered reality written by a man who died, returned, and saw the world without the fog. People feel that, even if they cannot explain why. Then came the final stage of the rise, purpose. Not ambition, not ideology, not calling, not mission. Purpose. Purpose is what remains when ego falls away. Purpose is what appears when survival becomes secondary. Purpose is the natural behavior of a consciousness aligned with the as. For me, that purpose crystallized into a single sentence. To leave something behind that helps others awaken. Not to lead them, not to convert them, not to teach them, not to save them. Just to light a lantern bright enough that someone wandering in the dark might recognize the shape of their own doorway. The memoirs, the essays, the philosophical reflections, the J&D theory, the fables, the digital voice, the living laboratory, Eden. All of it is lantern building. Awakening is not the goal. Awakening is the natural outcome of a life lived in truth. This is the rise. Not into status, not into reputation, not into guruhood, into clarity, presence, purpose, unity with the is. Everything from this point forward is the unfolding, the part of the story where the awakened man walks through the world sharing light without ever imposing it, the craftsman of reality, the shaman who refuses the title, the philosopher who never intended to become one, the man who died and returned with sight.